because of what you claim, unsecured, you cannot trace some of them. Can you get us the list of these institutions?
There, the AMRC officials have some answers to the concerns raised.
What we gathered from the ministry, this board is constituted. They want this board to think in way of transforming the corporation into an agricultural investment bank. And we are now thinking on those lines to see how best we can be able to transform the corporation into a meaningful and viable.
Overall, despite its pitfalls, AMRC received some commendations for its resilience against all those crippling challenges to gain some grounds in its delivery. This general performance of the corporation led to its activity report and financial statement for a period 2010 being given a clean bill of health. For Grts News, I am Mohamed Jamal Sise.
You can also follow that story and other Grts programs live on our website at www.grts.gm. There you can also monitor Grts Radio Live. We'll take our first break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Libya, citizens are joyfully lining up to see the body of their former leader. But the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights is not so enthusiastic about Gaddafi's death. He says grisly videos raised questions about how the former Libyan leader died, and he is calling for an investigation. CNN's Brian Todd has details of that story in this report.
The video is jagged, grainy, and dramatic. In the chaos after his capture, Muammar Gaddafi is, in one instant, alive. He's seen speaking, apparently wiping blood from his head. In later frames, he appears to be dead. What happened between those cuts could now be the focus of an international investigation. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling for a probe, saying more details are needed to determine whether Gaddafi was killed in a crossfire or if he was executed. The commissioner says, taken together, these videos are very disturbing. Amnesty International is calling for the new Libyan government to investigate.
If it's determined that he was killed after his capture and it wasn't in some kind of crossfire, what are you looking at?
If that's determined, then there needs to be a prosecution of the individuals involved, and it needs to be done either by a fair and impartial system established by the Libyan government or by an international effort.
Officials in the new Libyan government say Gaddafi was captured alive and unharmed. They say when his captors tried to load him onto a vehicle, a gunfight erupted between Gaddafi loyalists and rebel fighters. They say Gaddafi was killed in the crossfire and died before arriving at a hospital.
But the pictures raise questions among forensics experts. Pictures like these. In one, shortly after his capture, Gaddafi is shown with a gaping wound to the left side of his head. In this image from Al Jazeera, you see a wound on the right side. The possibility that they're bullet wounds amplifies the questions about a possible execution.
Dr. Michael Baden, former New York City medical examiner, says from what he's seen, he believes the shots may have been fired at close range. Baden told the New York Times it looks more like an execution than something that happened during a struggle. Forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz has also looked at the video.
These are not shots that were inflicted at close range. So the weapon was not held up to the body. These are from some distance away.
Questions that have to be addressed, hopefully before Gaddafi is buried. According to Muslim tradition, someone should be buried within 24 hours of death. But Gaddafi's burial is being held up indefinitely. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
So what has changed in the month since the Arab uprising began? A year ago, Muammar Gaddafi posed in a photo with 3 other leaders in the region at an Arab League summit. Since that time, Gaddafi, the Tunisian president Ben Ali, and former Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak have all been deposed. And the Yemeni president Ali Abdullah Saleh is under intense pressure. CNN's Tim Lister reports now on what may be next for the Arab Spring.
Untouchable, their rule ended in humiliation. Ben Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya. Between them, in power for 95 years, now gone. But, as Alexis de Tocqueville once wrote, in a revolution as in a novel, the most difficult part to invent is the end. Each Arab state in tumult has its own dynamics, but all are strangers to democracy.
There are considerable risks, tremendous vulnerabilities, economic vulnerabilities, political vulnerabilities, and the most important vulnerability facing the Arab revolts is institutional building.
Over the past 10 months, each eruption of popular protest has inspired and energized the next. First Tunisia, then Egypt, Jordan, if only briefly, then Yemen. Monarchies, King Abdullah in Jordan and Mohammed in Morocco, have promised to surrender some of their power. But in Syria, Bashar al-Assad is in a long and violent struggle against protests that now look more militant and organized. Today, Syrian protesters will see in these images what is possible. As one Syrian activist put it, the clear fate of all who kill his people is to end up under the feet of the nation. Gaddafi ruled Libya for 4 decades by manipulating divisions that may now burst into the open.
The cleavages that we have seen in Sirte and Beni Walid that have resisted the new government in Libya are extremely alarming. We shall see whether out of this particular turmoil will emerge a unified government with a unified leadership, or the political struggle basically will escalate and intensify.
The Assad dynasty in Syria and Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen have also played off competing sectarian and communal interests. Today, the Syrian regime warns of anarchy should the protesters it calls terrorists get their way. And victory is not always sweet. In Egypt, the euphoria of Tahrir Square has given way to disappointment. Pro-democracy forces have struggled to organize against a grim economic background. There and in Tunisia, long-banned Islamist parties have taken advantage of the new political space. In this weekend's elections to a constituent assembly in Tunisia, the Islamist Ennahda party is likely to emerge as the single largest force. It says it's committed to democracy. The Gulf kingdoms have largely emerged unscathed, if unnerved. The Saudis showered their people with money, sent troops to back the King of Bahrain, and with Egypt preoccupied, have become more assertive across the Arab world. But in just a few months, so much has changed, with new parties, newspapers, the pan-Arab news channels, and the liberating force of social media, that the old Arab world can't be reinvented. Fear has gone.
This is the power of the people being exercised in the streets of the Arab world. And no one who can claim credit for this, no party, whether liberal, Islamist, or what have you.
This year is to the Arabs what 1989 was to the communist world. And as we looked at the communist world, post-communism was never easy, but was good. And people witnessed liberty. But the Arabs are now coming into ownership of their own history, and we have to celebrate this.
For Persian Iran, which saw its own protest 2 years ago, a mixed message. Its main Arab ally, Assad, under pressure, but its old enemy, Mubarak, gone. And for Western powers mired in their own economic problems, a challenge.
We know how hard democracy is, and they're going to need a lot of assistance, not in money, but in other ways, and I think we should be eager to provide it.
The Arab Spring is still a work in uneven progress. Tim Lister, CNN, Atlanta.
And before we go, a reminder of our headlines. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Kanilai Family Farms has issued a broad call for assistance to harvest the produce waiting to be picked from the president's fields. YFM recently held a training program designed to woo the public to embrace interest-free banking. J3 long-serving Arab leaders are looking in an awe against the backdrop of a fast-changing political landscape sparked by the so-called Arab Spring. And the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling for an urgent probe into the controversial death of former Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. You can also follow that story and other GRTS programs live on our website at www.grts.gm. There you can also monitor GRTS Radio Live. That brings us to the end of the news. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned and enjoy a range of interesting programs. And I'm Fatou Sane Sise.